So I'm going to read a little bit more from the Greatest American Speeches. I left off on this one here, the Monroe Doctrine by James Monroe, addressed to Congress, 2nd of December, 1823, Washington. I'm going to read the gray section first. Born 28th of April, 1758, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, James Monroe, 5th President, made a lasting contribution to foreign policy in his Monroe Doctrine, which stated that further European colonization would not be tolerated. The United States would abstain from involvement in European political affairs, and that the European intervention in America would be considered an act of hostility. A fourth principle added later was opposition to the transfer of existing colonies from one European power to another. In 1821, the capital of Liberia was named Monrovia in recognition of Monroe's work in supporting the repatriation of blacks to Africa. Died 4th of July, 1831 in New York City. A Republican, James Monroe was elected president in 1817 with a huge majority over a Federalist candidate. His administration was referred to as the era of good feelings, and Monroe remained popular despite an economic slump and conflict over slavery in Missouri. Monroe rose to office from modest beginnings on a small Virginian land holding. When he was 16, he attended William and Mary College, but left to fight in the War of Independence. He served alongside George Washington, was decorated and promoted for heroism, and left the army as a major. In 1780, he took up law under the guidance of Thomas Jefferson, then governor of Virginia. This marked the start of a close friendship. After election to the Virginia House of Delegates in 1782, Monroe served in the Continental Congress. He was an anti-federalist, and in 1790 was elected to the Senate where, despite vigorously opposing President George Washington, he was made minister to France. When he failed to further Washington's plans there, Monroe was recalled to America. In 1799, Monroe became governor of Virginia and was twice re-elected. Under President Jefferson, Monroe acted as an envoy on further diplomatic negotiations in France, Britain, and Spain. In 1807, he resigned as governor of Virginia to become Secretary of State under President Madison, a post that brought him the burden of foreign affairs during the War of 1812. In 1814, he was made Secretary of War. When he became president, he was the only head of state to have held 2 cabinet positions. After Monroe lacked the brilliance of other contemporary statesmen, he was praised by Jefferson, Madison, and Adams, who described him as a mind sound in its ultimate judgments and firm in its final conclusions. Many attributed Monroe's popularity to his being the last of the War of Independence generation. He continued to wear the outdated knee breeches, silk stockings, and cocked hat of those revolutionary times, and admirers said he resembled Washington. At the end of his presidency, Monroe had to sell his Virginian plantation to pay off debts. The property now forms part of William and Mary College. He died of heart failure and tuberculosis in 1831 and was buried in New York City. His body was later reinterred at Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. So this one is the speech, starting from here. The occasion has been judged proper for asserting as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintain, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for further colonization by any European powers. It is only when our rights are invaded or seriously menaced that we resent injuries or make preparation for our defense. In the wars of the European powers in matters relating to themselves, we have never taken any part, nor does it comport with our policy to do so. It is only when our rights are invaded or seriously menaced that we resent injuries or make preparation for our defense. With the movements in this hemisphere, we are of necessity more immediately connected, and by causes which must be obvious to all enlightened and impartial observers. The political system of the Allied powers is essentially different in this respect from that of America. This difference proceeds from that which exists in their respective governments, and in the defense of our own, which has been achieved by the loss of so much blood and treasure, and matured by the wisdom of their most enlightened citizens, and under which we have enjoyed unexampled felicity. This whole nation is devoted. We owe it, therefore, to candor and to the amicable relations existing between the United States and those powers, to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety, with the existing colonies or dependencies of any European power. We have not interfered and shall not interfere. But with the governments who have declared their independence and maintained it, and whose independence we have, on great consideration and on just principles acknowledged, we cannot view any interposition for the purpose of oppressing them or controlling in any other manner their destiny by any European power in any other light than as the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States. In the war between those new governments and Spain, we declared our neutrality at the time of their recognition, and to this we have adhered, and shall continue to adhere, provided no change shall occur which in the judgment of the competent authorities of this government shall make a corresponding change on the part of the United States indispensable to their security. We should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. The late events in Spain and Portugal show that Europe is still unsettled. Of this important fact, no stronger proof can be adduced than that the Allied powers should have thought it proper, on any principle satisfactory to them, to have interposed by force in the internal concerns of Spain. Our policy in regard to Europe, which was adopted at an early stage of the wars which have so long agitated that quarter of the globe, nevertheless remains the same, which is not to interfere in the internal concerns of any of its powers, to consider the government de facto as the legitimate government for us, to cultivate friendly relations with it, and to preserve those relations by a frank, firm, and manly policy, meeting in all instances the just claims of every power, submitting to injuries from none, but in regard to those continents, circumstances are eminently and conspicuously different. It is impossible that the Allied powers should extend their political system to any portion of either continent without endangering our peace and happiness, nor can anyone believe that our southern brethren, if left to themselves, would adopt it of their own accord. It is equally impossible, therefore, that we should behold such interposition in any form with indifference. If we look to the comparative strength and resources of Spain and those new governments and their distance from each other, it must be obvious that she can never subdue them. It is still the true policy of the United States to leave the parties to themselves, in the hope that other powers will pursue the same course. So that was the Monroe Doctrine. The next one is the Declaration of Sentiments. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I wonder if I have time to read another one. Pages 1, 2, 3. So this one is the address to the first Women's Rights Convention, Seneca Falls, 19th of July, 1848. Trying to decide if I want to read another one. I might as well. Born 12th of November, 1815 in Johnstown, New York. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's famous keynote speech to the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls effectively launched the American women's rights movement. The Declaration of Sentiments called for fundamental reforms and demanded women's rights to vote. Elizabeth was a skilled speaker, and the speech shows her ability to combine a strong emotional appeal with well-reasoned arguments and undeniable logic. Died 26th of October, 1902 in New York City. Elizabeth Cady was initially educated at home, then attended the Johnstown Academy and the Troy Female Seminary, graduating in 1832. Her father, Daniel Cady, was a congressman and judge. It was through him that she first understood the extent to which U.S. law discriminated against women. From her early years, she was determined to fight for equal rights. Henry Brewster Stanton, whom Elizabeth married in 1840, insisting that the word obey was omitted from their marriage vows, was a lawyer active in the abolitionist movement. For many years, abolitionists and equal rights campaigners worked in close association, and Elizabeth became very friendly with prominent figures like Lucretia C. Mott, Frederick Douglass, Amelia Bloomer, and Susan B. Anthony. In July 1848, Elizabeth and Mott organized the first National Convention on Women's Rights in Seneca Falls, New York. The Declaration of Sentiments she introduced here was loosely modeled on the Declaration of Independence and was signed by all the delegates, 68 women and 32 men. The convention was the start of decades of campaigning. However, following the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, 1870, which approved the vote for Black Americans but not for women, a split formed between the abolitionist and women's rights movements. Elizabeth refused to support the amendment. It was not her only stand on important issues. Unlike some campaigners, she opposed abortion. She had 7 children herself and alienated others by her criticism of Christianity. Elizabeth worked tirelessly at a number of levels, planning campaigns, addressing legislative bodies and conventions, and speaking on the streets. She was a highly effective orator, and her work was perfectly complemented by Susan B. Anthony, who became her greatest friend and colleague. Elizabeth wrote widely, including letters and pamphlets and articles for periodicals like the New York Tribune. With Anthony and Matilda Jocelyn Gage, she compiled the first 3 volumes of The History of Women's Suffrage, published in 1881. There followed The Woman's Bible, 1895 through 98, and her autobiography, 80 Years and More, 1898. In 1868, she became co-editor of The Revolution, a new weekly newspaper devoted to women's rights. She also helped organize the National American Women's Suffrage Association in 1869, serving as president until 1892. Elizabeth was the main author of the Declaration of Rights for Women, which was presented at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876. And she also drafted a federal suffrage amendment that led to women finally being granted to the vote in 1920. Elizabeth died in 1902 and is buried in the Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York. Her daughter, Harriet Eden Stanton Blanche, was a leading suffragist. The speech. We have met here today to discuss our rights and wrongs, civil and political, and not, as some have supposed, to go into the detail of social life alone. We do not propose to position the legislature to make our husbands just, generous, and courteous, to seat every man at the head of the cradle, and to clothe every woman in male attire. We are assembled to protest a form of government existing without the consent of the governed, to declare our right to be free as man is free, to be represented in the government which we are taxed to support, to have such disgraceful laws as give man the power to chastise and imprison his wife, to take the wages which she earns, the property which she inherits, and in case of separation, the children of her love, the laws which make her a mere dependent on his bounty. It is to protest against such unjust laws as these that we are assembled today, and to have them, if possible, forever erased from our statute books, deeming them a shame and a disgrace to a Christian republic in the 19th century. We have met to uplift women's fallen divinity upon an even pedestal with man's, and strange as it may seem to many, we now demand our right to vote, according to the declaration of the government under which we live. The right is ours, have it we must, use it we will. The pens, the tongues, the fortunes, the indomitable wills of many women are already pledged to secure this right. The great truth that no just government can be formed without the consent of the governed, we shall echo and re-echo in the ears of the unjust judge, until by continual coming we shall weary him. There seems now to be a kind of moral stagnation in our midst. Philanthropists have done their utmost to rouse the nation to a sense of its sins, war, slavery, drunkenness, licentiousness, gluttony, have been dragged naked before the people, and all their abominations and deformities fully brought to light. Yet with idiotic laugh we hug those monsters to our breasts and rush on to destruction. Our churches are multiplying on all sides, our missionary societies, Sunday schools, and prayer meetings, and innumerable charitable and reform organizations are all in operation, but still the tide of vice is swelling and threatens the destruction of everything, and the battlements of righteousness are weak against the raging elements of sin and death. The right is ours, have it we must, use it we will. Verily the world waits the coming of some new element, some purifying power, some spirit of mercy and love. The voice of woman has been silenced in the state, the church, and the home, but man cannot fulfill his destiny alone. He cannot redeem his race unaided. There are deep and tender chords of sympathy and love in the hearts of the downtrodden and oppressed that women can touch more skillfully than man. The world has never yet seen a truly great and virtuous nation, because in the degradation of woman, the very fountains of life are poisoned at their source. It is vain to look for silver and gold from mines of copper and lead. It is the wise mother that has a wise son. So long as your women are slaves, you may throw your colleges and churches to the winds. You can't have scholars and saints so long as your mothers are ground to powder between the upper and nether millstone of tyranny and lust. How seldom now is a father's pride gratified, his fond hopes realized in the budding genius of his son. We do not expect our path will be strewn with the flowers of popular applause, but over the thorns of bigotry and prejudice will be our way, and on our banners we will beat the dark storm clouds of opposition from those who have entrenched themselves behind the stormy bulwarks of custom and authority, and who have fortified their position by every means, holy and unholy. But we will steadfastly abide the result. Unmoved, we will bear it aloft. Undauntedly, we will unfurl it to the gale. For we know that the storm cannot rend from it a shred, that the electric flash will but more clearly show to us the glorious words inscribed upon it, equality of rights. So I'll put this marker here, and I'll continue reading next time. Sojourner Truth. So that was a couple of speeches from the greatest American speeches. So I hope that helped you fall asleep a little bit. And yeah, thank you for watching my videos and subscribing and liking and commenting and all that. Yeah, hope that helped you fall asleep.